Hello, welcome to this episode of the Amory Speaks podcast. This is part of my Not Your Average Bible studies. Thanks for joining. Today is Sunday, December 8th, and I am going to be jumping in where we left off in chapter 4 of Matthew. I think we'll just get right down into it today instead of giving preliminaries and disclaimers and all this kind of stuff. Why not, right? It's what we come here to do and listen to, so thank you if you are listening and following along. I really appreciate your time for listening. I had left off with verse 17, I believe, is the correct term. I think you call them verses. And I had talked over, just already a bit about pronunciations and places, and, that I'm not well versed in this kind of thing. So right after I say I'm not going to get into disclaimers, I am going to just put there for anybody who is brand new, bear with me and forgive me because I am just a new student to this. So yeah, I'm not trying to claim I know anything or anything like that. But the second half of chapter 4 is a bit like a catch-up, like I was talking about in the last episode, sort of the highlights on the timeline of Jesus' sort of collection of his disciples and how they've met him and come into the story and joined him. And from 18 on it goes to say, and Jesus, walking by the Sea of Galilee, saw two brethren, Simon, called Peter, and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. And he saith unto them, Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. And they straightway left their nets and followed him. And going on from thence, he saw two other brethren, James, the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, in a ship with Zebedee their father, mending their nets. And he called them. And they immediately left the ship and their father, and followed him. And again, I'm reading from this Gideon's pocket version, King James. So I'm sure there's probably better accounts or better translations with more descriptions. But as I noted, it's kind of interesting to just hear the kind of quick timeline points in the way that they chose to publish and choose what should be important to be carried on, right? What should be translated and held into each line in the scripture here. And I love how it says, Follow me and I will make you fishers of men. What did he actually really say to them, and that made them leave their lives, their way of making the way in the world, of seeing the world, but then again, I understand his Gospels and things, and I'll go into reading further into that and understanding that. But just as a new eyes and new thoughts to this, a newcomer, right? It's intriguing. It's interesting. Yeah. I just wonder. Same thing with the others. What makes you leave your father and your ship and follow, right? And Jesus went about. Sorry to carry on to verse 23. Jesus went about all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing all manner of sickness and all manner of disease among the people. And now, coming from where I come from, having read the gospel of peace already, understanding the art of healing and these great teachings, be them out of the Essenes or out of the Veda or out of Chinese medicine, all of these different Eastern-esque worlds that were pre-civilization, pre-knowledge and wisdom, that the Middle Eastern culture, the Roman Catholic Church, all of these have sort of built our quote-unquote ancient history upon to tell us they were the comers of this knowledge, sort of. But we know better than that. I know better than that. I'm curious to know more about it, though. Not to say that I know the truth better. I just know that they are trying to fool me, is what I mean by saying I know better than that. It's interesting to see the great inversions and the distortions they're attempting, the manipulations that are sort of like traps here set. I sense them, and I sense the fact to be wary around them, to tiptoe here and to be careful, but exactly the intentions and what's to be had, I'm not quite sure of, and I'm not trying to put off any sort of front like I am either. Be curious to hear if anybody has ideas or what they think behind that. I love those kind of angles. Feel free to share in the comments or send me emails about that. But I'm not going to plaster out just one angle of perception I have right now, except for my own opinions that I'm doing, but I'm not going to try to pinpoint some kind of archonic persona behind the scenes right now. I'll leave that for a later date, later time, different videos. Not on Sacred Sunday here. I'd like to focus on goodness, peace. But with that said, knowing the kind of, it's so beautiful to know the kind of ancient truths he's bringing to light, and he's helping others to realize, helping them heal through, bringing forth, seeking of truth, the goodness of light, of honoring goodness within you, brotherhood and the one Father, the connectivity and unity behind the original ancient teachings in the Old Testament, as well as the arts of fasting and cleanliness and taking care of yourself and honoring yourself and honoring your body vessel as a creation that God has created, and wanting to take pride in it in a good way, in a way that you take care of it because it is of God's creation, to eat cleanly foods and to think cleanly thoughts. And it's very much a Buddhist, Taoist sort of approach as well, to having right thinking and stuff, he's teaching. And coming through the cities and synagogues teaching these things, and imagine that, and also healing people and bringing forth great miracles and enlightening others to the healing capabilities within themselves even, because as he said and he teaches, we have these unlocking powers within us to do great work just like him, and God has bestowed us with these great powers, but we must ignite them within ourselves in order to bring them forth and in order to cause the real healing that happens. I'll get into that a little bit more when we get into some of the more direct examples. I like a couple of the things here that I want to kind of look into exactly what he's healing. And I love the stories within the Gospel of Peace as well, because they give sort of like clinical examples of what the symptoms were and what he used to help heal them and how, and what was the after effects and the results, and then the healing afterwards, and how he even goes on to say, okay, that now that you've sort of expelled these demon Satan worms within you and cast them out and fasted and come to a pure body, don't go back to harming yourself and taking in and ingesting all of these things. Don't go back to the cities and expose yourself to these devils and Satans and allow them back inside of you, And he gives great advice and great guidance as to what you should try to eat and live like. And I found that so inspiring and also very difficult in itself. The advice is quite simple, but yet difficult to live in the world that we do live in. We'll get into that at a later time and talk a little bit about that with fasting and stuff like that last week already. So I'll recap on that again later. Don't want to harp on the same thing too much. even though it's a great teaching, it's such a working that I'm going through. And I feel also it's, I've been calling it a segment in my Jesus journal, sort of, workings that I feel are led by the archetype of him, or great mentor, guru, teacher type of figure. He is brother, he is, saint, or whatever we want to look at him as. But anyways, I do think there's sort of an ever-presence guidance of his, that he is a connecting bridge offering that we can speak with and have a point of connectivity through. Each one of us is unique in their own way too. I'm saying these kind of disclaimer things, I've said this many times, but just in case anybody's new, or just for my own airing out here. But just to get back into here, into actually reading, so into 24, I'm going to hop back in to verse 24. And his fame went throughout all Syria, and they brought unto him all sick people that were taken with divers diseases and torments, and those which were possessed with devils, and those which were lunatic, and those that had the palsy, and he healed them. And I love these terms, and I wrote them down in my own log of things I for my own reference. I'm going to go look up in historical translations to see exactly what are these sort of symptomatic old world diseases they're referencing here, and what do we call them today, and what are the likes of the symptoms and the causations, and what's the energetics here of divers disease and torments. I mean, there could be anything, right? And those which were possessed with devils, lunatic too. In my translation here, and I found this so interesting, in this version, lunatic is spelled with a CK at the end, and it's singular. And those that had the palsy, what an interesting thing palsy is in itself, and healed them. All the tightening up of muscles, or the deterioration of it, or the wearing out. It's such an interesting, almost polio-like kind of thing, right? And I love how simplistic it is. It's almost like it reminds me so Old Testament of God created, on the first day God created earth, and it was good. It's so, and it was good, and he created this, and it was good. And it's so like simplistic and to the point, and it leaves one to wonder if more, and the final verse here that I have for chapter 4, and there followed him great multitudes of people from Galilee, and from Decapolis, and from Jerusalem, and from Judea, and from Jordan. And it's interesting because the "from" is italicized in my translation, my Bible here. And also Decapolis is written out phonetically, but Jerusalem is not. Judea is not. Jordan is not. Galilee is not. Why? It's so interesting. And exactly what are the distinctions and delineations here of all the different people, And it's interesting because the wilderness of Judea, right, is where John the Baptist is. And yeah, I get it, they're just different cities. And all of these peoples are kind of nestled into one demographic that's sort of difficult to delineate and has been intermingled for many thousands of years. So I guess the answer is simplistic in itself as well. But I love the historical references. What are the nuances? To put ourselves in these people's shoes back then would be interesting in itself, to know what were the times, the social context of where the borderlines were, and what made them different from each other then, I feel it might help connectivity as to bringing what makes us different in these days, and also who's he speaking to and who's he not. And again, I've talked about this in my us versus them sort of homeworking sessions already, these pre-sessions before I started reading directly from the Bible here, to kick around ground to my first thoughts in reading these things. Same thing with the terminology, the difference between when they say the Gentiles, exactly, categorically, I guess, speaking demographically or ethnicity-wise, I would be a Gentile, I think. It's quite confusing sometimes. But again, I don't want that to deter me from seeking truth or understanding that there's a potential for me for learning my own truth in these words. So I won't be letting that deter me. Although I did already kind of talk a bit about it, and I will be going more into that too, because it's an interesting perspective to learn teachings from if you feel like an outcasted person who doesn't actually belong to the teachings, and yet when you hear them or you read them, get a chance to, you find things that resonate with you. You hear things that say, oh, I thought that, I feel like that too. It's an interesting place to be at. I think we can all learn something from being in that position, and also we can learn things from being the ones who get allowed to wear the star and be part of the club. And then, wait a minute, there's others out there that feel that way? Is that right or wrong, and why? And for what reasons and at what times is that allowed or not allowed? And then should I be a part of this all the time? Do I want to claim 100% validity in the club if that's what it means? And just, I'm not saying right or wrong to any of the answers. These are questions that get posed to me as I read these things, Now, chapter 5 in itself is amazing, and it gets into his exact teachings. And as I've been reading, and I'm just in Matthew myself, I haven't got too far ahead of what I'm reading live, but I have been highlighting interesting different types of information, the things that are written down and subscribed as his direct words, I'm highlighting in a different color and looking at in a different way his verbatim teaching, so to speak, versus the sort of social highlights and the timeline pop-ins that are included. And then also trying to look at different terms and translations in different color and different ways too. So as I go through these sessions, you'll be aware I will be picking at these from those sort of main different angles and maybe focusing on different things here and there based on that. In chapter 5 is amazing because it gets into a lot of his direct teachings, and I hear so much truth and systems talk in them that I can't wait to get into that. But I think I will wait to really talk about that because I've already been 20 minutes into half of chapter 4, and I'd love to just keep this episode as closing out chapter 4, and maybe as a preliminary lead up into chapter 5. The very first verse is quite general, and it's a segue, and it says, and seeing the multitudes. And what does that really mean, in seeing the multitudes? He went up into a mountain, and when he was set, his disciples came unto him. And this is so interesting. And seeing the multitudes. Now, and seeing the multitudes, this can be translated into many different ways. Seeing the multitudes of those he helped, seeing the multitudes of those still to come. Is it an intermingling of both? Is it, it's interesting because some of the further things that I know he said, I wonder what was his perspective really of this. And many people, when we finally get to hear sort of the hero's journey from the first person aspect, the hero doesn't quite always know exactly what he's doing the whole time. A lot of times the persona that gets played off is one of much more firm knowing and foresight than actually in the first person walkthrough present moment was actually there. There's a lot more guidance, intuitive magic in the ever-present moment that gets this co-creative sense of walking through the motions that I feel almost gets forgotten or gets missed when we tell the timeline story, when we have the fiction novel, Hollywood version of the movie afterwards telling the hero's tale. And that's because it all comes, it all ends up okay in the end. And it has this sort of foresight that it is going to turn out all right, that it was all for a reason. And so somehow we sort of get this marker or assumption on the hero in his role throughout that he knew it, that there was no air of mystery, that there was no worry, that there was no unsureness to it. And I feel like in everything that I have been led to see as truth and understanding, that perhaps that's a bit inverted in itself and not correct. And I hear in his words a lot in the direct scriptures where his sort of verbatims are given that ground that he doesn't want to be held as an idol, that it isn't supposed to be interpreted like that, and that he's not that figurehead. He didn't want to be as that. He wanted to pass the torch. He was meant to enlighten humanity, to bring forth more truth and to show the way by being that sort of 100th monkey, and by enlightening all of us to keep going with it, and that it was and is still a great gift where we can all embody, and we should all be working towards learning how to. And he, I guess without getting into too much of what I think his words are teachings, and that chapter 5 is so much of his words teaching, I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to leave my own opinions there and let his words speak for himself when I come back around for chapter 5 and see where we go from there after. But thanks for listening here in my closing out of chapter 4. I hope you have a beautiful Sunday. If you are catching this live on Sunday, thanks for taking time for sacred listening and giving me your ear to listen. I hope you've enjoyed this quicker session, and I'm sure next one will be a bit longer though. In the meantime, you could always find me on Telegram or YouTube or BitChute, Amory Speaks, or Amory Speaks 2. If you're finding me on YouTube, I'm in that backup channel because I got kicked out of my original channel. If you are finding me on BitChute, then you'll always find me here. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.